Hello, everyone. I am recording this week in a different location, as you might notice here as I'm getting ready for week 6 of your online program. I'm in our university CETL Center. That's the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, and actually our own Dr. Land runs this thing. So I'm over here recording because I have had a technology failure. This might, I don't know, be comforting to those of you who have struggled with technology, but my webcam has failed in my office computer. They are unable to resolve the issue. And so this gets to the number one thing I have learned about teaching online, and that is always, 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 always have a technology backup plan. You just don't have wiggle room to fool around with failed technology. So the CETL space is a wonderful place where we can come and I don't know, talk about learning and teaching and come to training sessions and workshops. And they also have computers with cameras that work and Camtasia and all this fun stuff on them. So that is the nice part here. I know we went through the surveys that y'all did, I think at the end of week 2 or 3, and there was a lot of feedback about, kind of the stresses and the overwhelming nature about becoming a graduate student and going online. Some of y'all were very comfortable with it because you'd used Blackboard before and you were comfortable with the Google products. Hopefully now that it's been a few more weeks, you'll feel like you are a little bit more comfortable. And again, we're not going to throw anything else new at you this semester. The city certification, I think, is the only other thing, and that's just kind of a tutorial type class. So just hang in there. My 71-year-old mom is planning her 50th college reunion on Google Drive, so I'm confident that we can all embrace her spirit of continuing to learn and grow. I'm trying to think other announcements. In week 6 next week, well, I'm here next week for me. I'm recording this on Thursday while you're still in week 5. You will be getting back your issue reports. Dr. Buckner and I have split the grading roughly in half, and I will also make a little video for you showing you how to get back in, to turn it in, to access your feedback. It is not intuitive how to do this when you go to click on My Grades in Blackboard. Um, it's easier for me to just make a video and show you how to do it, but in order to do this, I have to go in as a demo student and get into the assignment, but I can't do that until we're done grading, blah, blah, blah. So I will have that posted for you next Monday or Tuesday. I think that's the only other announcements. This week is kind of a low-key week. I'll pull up our schedule here. We basically have 2 essays that we're reading, and then just doing our discussion boards, and then checking out your feedback on that first issue report. And please get in contact with us if you have any questions or concerns. You are going to have to do another issue report. So that's the list of activities for this week. And let's see again, you have stuff coming up on the horizon, but that's another thing. And here are our little weekly learning outcomes and everything. And we're going to spend some time talking about teaching this week, different methods for trying to integrate composition and literature, etc. So just on the horizon, remember in a few weeks and in the middle of October, you're going to have a draft of that autobiographical assignment. And then the first week of November is that second issue report. So again, once you get your feedback for the first one, figure out if you need to talk to us or email chat or whatnot. So, thinking about this reading from Transforming English Studies, I just want to address a few points. I think, again, with the Lene Louis-Gaye, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, I think she's kind of tapping into that spirit that I like in this book about kind of trying to find a positive approach and focusing, okay, well, here are problems. What can we do? Let's try to find a solution. And again, even if I don't agree with everything in the person's essay, I like that emphasis on actually trying to do something positive and help one another. And I thought it was really intriguing that she brought up this example of Jardine. And I looked this up online because you can find all kinds of Google, you can Google how to pronounce names. And some people say Jardin, some people say Jardine, some people pronounce it some other way. So I'm just saying, I don't know, I'll probably go back and forth. With this example of Jardine from the late 18th century, early 19th century in Scotland, I thought it was really fascinating. On pages 174 and 175, she notes that he was using collaboration within the classroom and peer review hundreds of years ago. These are just kind of best practices to have students interacting with one another. And I know that some of y'all in your feedback to the surveys, you're saying, oh, I wasn't expecting to have this many discussion forums, or sometimes when we're doing them, they might feel a little bit tedious, but this is just a best practices of teaching, that you have to have student-to-student interaction, and in an online environment, that doesn't happen it doesn't happen as spontaneously, I guess, as it does in a classroom. So it's just something that we've been doing for hundreds of years. I felt very supported in that. So I appreciated how she was writing about how we could incorporate the subdisciplines of teaching composition and also teaching literature, and she used this historical example here. Where does this start? Right here on page 163. And the gap that she's writing about here is this gap between literature and composition. And I think we've also looked at this in those introductory essays the first couple weeks when I was doing the class, and you might have already touched on this with the weeks that you did with Dr. Buckner with linguistics and sociolinguistics and discourse analysis and English Ed. Those are other subdisciplines. And then after this week, you're going to have a couple weeks of rhetoric and composition, and this issue may come up with this kind of divide between rhetoric and composition and literature. And again, this came about in the late 19th century because the nature of the university changed. Prior to that, prior to these land grant institutions, universities, and the introduction of the research model at Johns Hopkins, coursework was integrated. It was a rhetorical university, and so writing, oral communication, logic, rhetoric, these were all integrated in all the classes of the curriculum. You didn't have a separate writing class. But all of a sudden with this research model, everything was getting separated out, and they kind of gave composition, writing, to the literature and linguistics department, who were like, well, this isn't really what we do. We thought everybody taught writing. No, you're getting it now. So that's the origins of this, and it kind of, I guess, that created this gap, or this, I don't know, friction. Again, I don't feel any friction with my rhetoric and composition colleagues, but these are the historical origins. So she's asking, what are some ways that we can do this? And she ties it to this idea that studying, that reading and writing are interrelated. And this gets into some keywords here from her essay that I'd like to bring up. So this reading-writing connection, which those of you who are already teaching, you already know tons about this. You could probably talk about it much more so than I could. She brings up, and so, she says you're going to use reading and composition anyway. You could pick really any kind of reading you wanted to, although that's not exactly true for teaching students to transfer their skills. But anyways, that's another topic. She also brings up the term critical literacy in here, and she is using this in terms of writing and reading, giving students the skills to critically examine their place in society, to critically examine the role that writing plays in their social positioning, and how writing can give you access to power and all that fun stuff. So it's really kind of a political thing. And I've got a website here actually that will define it for us. This is coming to you from the UNC School of Education, so Heidi can help vouch for this website's authenticity. And again, this is teeny tiny. My eyes are old. Critical literacy is the ability to read text in an active, reflective manner in order to better understand power, inequality, and injustice in human relationships. So I'll come back to this website, but it's to sort of give students what we've referred to before as these citizenship skills, teaching them to be good members of their society. So that's exactly what Jardine was interested in as well. And he felt that for these Scottish students in his Scottish University in Glasgow, that studying English literature and written and oral communication is the key, quote, to personal advancement and job prospects, as well as, quote, civic engagement. This is on pages 167 and 168, and she writes that we can foster the civic imagination with the study of literature, etc. If we merge composition and literature, then this gets composition beyond that negative stereotype as just being a skills course, and it gets literature beyond the stereotype of being useless or not connected to the real world. So I think this is a great idea in theory. It also addresses problems with teaching writing as a service or as a burden. She also makes the really good point in here that so often in PhD programs, Graduate students are used to teach composition, but they may not have a specialty or training in rhetoric and composition. They could be literature studies students. They could be creative writing studies students, even perhaps linguistics or something like that. So, if you do this, that might help them out in being able to better teach the class. So here I'm going to jump and talk about the Christopher Schroeder, because I think that they have a little bit of a dialogue going on. And I like that he really doesn't agree with some of these points that she's making. So he's a little bit later in this kind of hybrid approach. Yes, English teachers we have known. I'm sure you get those of you who teach English, this opening anecdote about not wanting to tell strangers what you do for a living, that might ring true for you. I get this all the time. Oh, you teach English, you're a grammar Nazi, quote unquote. I don't like using that word in that way. But yeah, that you're just a no fun if you identify yourself as an English teacher. It's like, oh, good Lord. And people even do it here in Gardner-Webb in the faculty dining hall. It's bizarre. So anyway, he debunks this idea of teaching literature and writing as fostering good citizens. He states that there is actually, here on page 215, that this is a myth. He's quoting from Harvey Graft and a book called Labyrinths, and he says this is a literacy myth, and that there is absolutely no research, there's no historical evidence, there's nothing to suggest that there is a positive cause and effect relationship between reading and writing and social interaction, economic growth, individual wealth, or even democracy. So I don't know. I don't know if that's one of those things, you have to sometimes people who end up teaching or going into graduate school, they oftentimes have an idealistic personality, and maybe that's part of that. Maybe it works in that way for some people, but not for others. Maybe it works that way for us, but maybe not for everybody. I don't know. I think that part of my growth as a teacher has been realizing that my students don't really share my goals, and appreciating that and respecting that and having a little bit of distance. So yeah, he's not afraid to debunk that and to call that into question. And he also raises a lot of good concerns that I think her example gets around, because she's dealing with a historical example and she's dealing with a much more homogeneous student population in the example, probably middle class to upper class Scots men in the late 18th, 19th century. These were people who were, at this time, people who went to universities. They were considered to be the potential leaders of the society, so politicians, lawyers, the bureaucrats who would run the country, etc. This is who went to college. The clergy went to college, etc. And that's the way it was in the United States as well. People didn't go to college for a business degree. You went out and opened a business, or created the printing press, or whatever it is you did. So Jardine is dealing with a more homogeneous group of people, and Schroeder very rightly brings up that the big challenge of teaching in any classroom is that we are just so diverse now. He mentions immigrant students. He mentions the influence of electronic text and social media, and he asks, can we even articulate a type of universal cultural literacy in the way that Jardine was doing, with this emphasis on English literature and teaching a very specific type of prose style. He says, should we even try to do that anymore? Is this the purpose of writing courses? And I appreciate that he quotes from Mary Louise Pratt, who's a very influential theorist for postcolonial studies. She does a lot with what happens when different cultures and different social groups come together in what she calls contact zones. And here she's referring on page 218, he quotes her talking about the linguistics of community and the linguistics of contact. And our classrooms and I think our society are increasingly becoming contact zones or contact areas. They're no longer community where we can assume we all have this homogeneous identity and homogeneous attitudes towards writing. So I liked that there was that difference of opinion, and y'all can think about it and pick whatever it is you would like. The next thing I would like to talk about here with this example of Jardine, and this is This is something that I think we will talk about a bit more as you get into rhetoric and composition. You probably got into this with the socially constructed sociolinguistics and things like this. Um, oh, here's the stuff about, she talks about writing as a product, as a process, as a system. You'll talk about this in your weeks with rhetoric and composition as well. And that Jardine is choosing this writing as a system, as a way to teach his composition classes and using English literature. And oh, here's some key terms from Schroeder, what I've already mentioned right there. You can take a moment and write those things down if you would like. You can also post this on Blackboard. But I guess my point here is, after reading the Schroeder, I was like, well, you know, Schroeder's got really great points about contact versus community and the civic engagement and so forth. And last year when I had read this essay, I went back and did some research, because there's a really dangerous slippage in here. And this does relate to what we talk about with teaching today, where she is, he's teaching Scottish students. He's at a Scottish university, and there's this slippage between Britain, Great Britain, England, English, Scotland. And, you know, you can see where I'm going with this. Post-colonialist, this is what I do. I suppose for full disclosure, I should, what is this, from the beginning? Yeah. I should state my last name is Scottish. It's Gaelic for dark water. Here's Castle Duffus. Never would I have thought that there was a Castle Duffus, but there is. It's up near Aberdeen in the northeast of Scotland. I think it's the Moray County, or the Moray area. The Earl of Moray was the noble person in charge of this, and he let it go. Obviously, it's a ruin, scenic ruin, I would say. So yes, up here by Aberdeen. So here at this little map, we can see where what she's doing is kind of running into these problems with teaching a certain kind of literature and kind of imposing a cultural bias or a cultural point of view. They are here in Scotland, in Glasgow, and he's teaching in what, the 1750s on up to the 1820s. Great Britain did not exist until 1706. Up until 1706, Wales and England, and Ireland, English had colonized Wales and Ireland. They existed as, I suppose, the United Kingdom, or Ireland was a colony of England, but Great Britain did not exist. Scotland and England and Wales merged in 1706 politically and economically, and this goes back to James I of England inheriting the crown from Elizabeth because she had no offspring. And he, prior to that, you probably remember, was the King of Scotland. And so he has these two crowns, and he has no idea what to do with them, and he was the first person who was like, we've just got to join these countries now. And obviously there is resistance to this. Nobody likes this type of change. And so they become a country in 1706. And of course the political and economic dominant country is England. And so then English becomes the cultural dominant, the superior language, the superior culture. I think it's very telling that he's teaching them to write in English literature. There's Scottish literature. He's not using it because he wants to assimilate them into an English cultural identity. There's a lot of stuff in here. He wants them to write with, oh, what is this? Here I have it on my page. He wants them to write with a correct, chaste, and graceful English style here on page 172 that sounds like the English literature that he's teaching. Oh, there's an extended quote here on page 172 I wanted to get all hot and bothered about. To improve their employment opportunities. He wants them to adopt this style, and so that they sound like they're, you know, writing like an English literature person, who of course is going to be an elite of that society as well. And good models in poetry, eloquence, and history, and learn the proper method of reading and of imitating these models. Now, you know, I know there is a counter argument to this, but post-colonialist. I think this is kind of this is where we can see that these stereotypes about the classroom, which Christopher Schroeder is referring to, that you are these authoritarian figures who say there is one right way to write. This is it. This is where it comes from. And I think that Jardine probably meant well, but he's coming at this with an attitude of cultural superiority, and he wants to assimilate his rough. I think, oh, they call them rustic and ill-prepared in his writing. So, you know, code words. We use those code words today to talk about students who are rustic and ill-prepared. So I think this is just something that's important to keep in mind when we look at any kind of example of teaching, how, you know, there are things we can admire about it, but we need to be critical about it. And also, you know, as I mentioned before, that he's teaching in the rhetorical university. We're in the research university, and our goal is how do we reintegrate writing into all the disciplines, I suppose. So we can also think about, you know, she raises this idea of critical literacy. I'm not quite sure that what he's doing is critical literacy. If this is supposed to understand power and inequality, he's making, well, I guess they are understanding it because they're having to give up their culture and their language. But it's not, it's going to assimilate them. It's not going to give them the ability to interrogate social issues and all that fun stuff. It's not going to help them dismantle social injustice and inequality, etc. It's also kind of hard to take current theory and apply it to history, because critical literacy comes out of a lot of Marxist schools of thoughts. And, hey, we're at the birth of capitalism. Adam Smith, he's Scottish. Entire Enlightenment is Scottish. So anyway, I think that this is a big issue with teaching literature and composition. So, you know, I understand this idea of trying to make writing and literature seem more relevant and useful, but it's dangerous when you pick these literary models. I mean, and that's it's a really high standard to set for anybody. I know Louis Gaillet mentions, oh, you can bring in other texts, you can bring in whatever you want as models, etc. But this is where it gets really confusing with composition, and I think this is kind of an open question here with composition is, you know, what kind of content do you have in a composition class? It's teaching writing, but it's divorced from any kind of content, whereas if you were in a discipline like, I don't know, psychology, you would learn the writing that was appropriate for that discipline and what would be expected of you in those classes and as a professional counselor or going into graduate school or whatever. But a composition class at the university level, it doesn't have a content. It's supposed to be teaching students to write for their later classes and so forth, but you know, you could put literature in there, but it's a dangerous thing to do because it's a general education class. So yeah, those are the questions I would ask about composition. And you're going to have 2 weeks of rhetoric and composition, and I'm going to let Dr. Buckner speak to those issues since that's her expertise. And I worry about this national culture argument. That's just so fraught with problems. In this day and age, I think if one did it, you would have to interrogate it. And this idea of, yeah, I already talked about the literary text being models, etc. Yeah, typically what I think about is how I can integrate writing strategies into my literature classroom with the writing assignments that they use, because that's a big gap for me. I would teach all this stuff about the writing process and composition and then not re-remind them of this in literature. So the past, I'd say 3-4 years, I've really been pushing them to turn in brainstorming, to do brainstorming in class, to do peer review and peer editing, to turn in drafts, and to work on not, you know, separate projects, but to kind of scaffold a big project for the semester so that they're improving and getting better. So I think that there are lots of ways that you can bridge the gap, and for me, I'm really interested in writing across the curriculum ideas and how I can take writing and rhetoric and integrate it into my literature classrooms so that they're transferring those skills and transferring that learning, which is a huge thing in education right now, especially at the university level, because they don't repeat these subjects each year like they do in secondary school and before that. So, you know, we have to keep repeating the writing, or they're actually worse writers when they graduate. Just like if you teach them, if they have one math class when they're freshmen, they're worse at math when they graduate than when they started, when they just came out of high school. So for me, that is a big question. So that is where I will leave you with this idea about literature in the composition classroom. I have tried that before. It was a huge failure. But again, I think we have to be very critical, and I've said this before, you really have to know your students, you have to know the time period you're in, you have to know your university and yourself, etc. All right, I think that's it. I hope this isn't too long, and I hope y'all have a great week. I will put up a separate prompt for the discussion boards, and again, I'll put up that video about how to find your feedback on the issue reports.